Okay. Now we were talking about devising of disputes. And then when you devise dispute, we talked about influence, right? Other than just influencing, it's also important that you have expectations of very specific outcomes. It means you must be absolutely clear as to what the outcome will be. We discussed the last time and we talked about this Brown versus Board of Education, where they were talking about desegregating schools along racial lines, right? Yes or no?
Yes, yes.
Yes, sir.
Now, and we said one of the things that was an outcome of that case being won was the defunding of schools with a predominantly Black population. That may not be an outcome that was conceived when that case was being pursued. Now, the next one is that usually there are impacts. You can have interest groups can make impacts, like NGOs and all that. Then you can also have movements that can make impact. The LGBTQ movement is a movement, the feminist movement is another, the Black Lives Matter is one. And in Nigeria, for example, we are beginning to have nationalist movements, which may be a bad thing or a good thing, only God knows. But you are beginning to have different types of movements. There was an Islamic movement, both in terms of legal terms and in terms of there being a physical movement. Some may morph into the Boko Haram or any other movement. Now, a key component of what you do is when you sit down and you say, okay, how are we going to evaluate impact? How do we evaluate the impact we have made? And there are different metrics for evaluation, but some are these. Number one, legal awareness and consciousness. How conscious are we now about what was happening before? When the feminist movement started, most of our fathers were traditional men, for example. In line with the feminist movement, I think men are more aware of their place in society and even their place in the home, in terms of how they even talk to women. Sometimes it was thought as being derisive. Now, I think people talk to women with much more respect. I hope I'm correct.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
I don't see any woman agreeing.
Sir, I believe it depends on the individual experience, sir.
It depends on the individual.
Yes, the individual experience is very different compared to the, should I say, like the world view, in a way.
Okay, but do you feel that there's better awareness of feminist or gender issues now than there were before?
Yes, yes.
There was before, sorry.
Yes, sir.
It's just the way people react to it, because some people can still talk about it in a derisive and insulting manner.
Yes.
Okay. I believe I accept your this thing. Now, there's also the issue of implementation. When Gani Fawehinmi won the INEC case, was there implementation or not? Of course, there was implementation, and nobody cared whether INEC now said we have to print 20 billion ballot papers instead of 20 million, this, and that. They had to follow the court judgment by creating ballot papers that encompass all the new political parties that they were forced to register. And you also have to understand that each time there is a change of such, a social change in that manner, there is also a transmission or transfer of power. when the Disability Rights whatever Act came into play, it specified within so-so and so-so and so-so period, all institutions must have a passageway for people with disability. So the universities don't have the power anymore. Public institutions do not have the power anymore. When you are putting up a structure, you must put it. You do not put it, somebody with polio and crutches trying to climb staircases, if he falls down and anything happens to him, you pay. You pay big time damages. And you may also be prone for criminal charges. You may be prone to criminal, So all those things, it means that there's an exchange of power. INEC doesn't have the power anymore. The citizen, the political parties have the power. Institutions don't have the power anymore. The disabled person has the power. So there's a transmission, a transfer of power, a shifting of the demographics in terms of the exercise of power. And there are other metrics too in terms of impact. While we've talked about awareness and all those things, there can also be spin-offs in terms of impact. When people were talking about the LGBTQ, right, the LGBTQ actually used some of the movements, some of the civil rights movement ethos as a rallying cry. From people who were talking about racial emancipation to people who are now talking about sexual emancipation. So another metrics could be, number one, what impact has this particular movement had on other movements or other social change events? And we said, what is the input? When you are trying to mobilize, what do you put in? One of the things you put in is what? Coordination, right? Another thing you put in a reassessment of the concept of rights. When the government, for example, says we are going to do everything we can to assist people with disabilities, that's the wrong concept. You are not assisting people with disabilities. You are assisting your citizens. You are not even assisting your citizens or anybody. You are following the law. Because the law talks about a full expression of all citizens. So the psychology is not that you are helping, it is that you are bound so to do. Then again, the input could be comparative studies of other places. We discussed this plea bargaining thing, and we talked about when someone is talking about plea bargaining, for example, you also have to ask yourself, what is the origin of this thing called plea bargaining? How is it practiced in other countries? So if INEC, for example, comes in and says it will be impossible to put 200 parties on the ballot, you have to ask yourself, which other countries have 200 parties on the ballot, and how do they put them on the ballot for election purposes? And because of that, you don't just compare jurisdictions, you compare what? Concepts. For example, the civil rights movement, like we discussed, compare it to LGBT rights. What is the correlation in terms of implementation? I mean, in terms of the concept, in terms of the elements. What is the correlation? Because using that analogy, it means if it can happen there, it can happen here. Or for example, gender issues. Gender issues, for example, you can look at it without even thinking in terms of the right to life. But the right to life and the right to abortion became correlative issues between each other. The child has the right to life. The woman has the right to control of her biological body. Contradictory. So every jurisdiction must choose which one it prioritizes. And usually it's easy to see an analogy somewhere that you can use as a resolution to show that things can be practicable. And some people say because of the social change and the new social change persuasion of lawyers, lawyers are becoming almost like politicians. And law is being viewed as an alternative to politics. And law is being used as being viewed as an alternative to politics. But I see it as not a substitute for politics, but it supplements politics. Now, Scotell Cummings is a writer, and he stated certain things in terms of mobilization, when you want to mobilize for a social change issue. And he says, these are your considerations. Number one, what is the problem to be solved? Two, how does law contribute to that problem? Three, how can the law be changed to resolve that problem? And when we are talking about change, you talk in terms of top down or bottom up. Which one is more appropriate? If it's top down, then it means you have to try to influence legislators. If it is bottom up, then it means you start devising cases. And the next one is, what is the most effective strategy for changing the law? We just discussed. Are we thinking top down? Are we thinking bottom up? Are we thinking case law, or are we thinking legislation? What is the appropriate scale? Is this something that concerns only Kwara State, for example, or Nigeria, or internationally, West Africa, or the whole world? And what is the anticipated political-legal responses by the opponents? Because you have to anticipate what will be their answer to what we are trying to do. INEC will say you can't put also things on the ballot. What will be our response to that? Somebody in the East will say a girl child not being able to, allowing a girl child to inherit from her deceased parents will destroy the whole social structure. And someone else again has to look at it and say, but is this not the same thing that happened in Papua New Guinea or somewhere else? What was the answer of that jurisdiction to this question? Then another one is, what are the likely enforcement problems of the change of the law? As a lawyer, it's something you also have to think about. How enforcement comes into play. What are the problems? Because the defendant is going to come without story. Even if this judgment is given, it will not be executable because of so, and so. And courts don't like giving judgments that cannot be given action to. So as a social change lawyer, you must have that answer. Yeah, Theophilus. You have another class.
Well, not an answer, actually. The combined law students have another class right now.
Okay, don't worry. I'll finish right now.
All right, sir.
Yeah, thank you. So we go to the next one, and then who are the lawyers and how do they drive mobilization? Lawyers can come from different things, special interest groups, non-profit organizations, there are non-profit firms, there are profit firms, etc. And then you need to develop test cases, like I said. And how is law mobilized? Law is mobilized by, we've seen, you can do that through litigation. And there are other ways, negotiating resolution to disputes, structured deals, creating new relationships in agreements and all that, and advising communities as lawyers. And evaluation. How do you measure success or failure? You have to devise that by yourself. Responses to other demographics, social change, greater access to information. Do people have greater access to information now? Yes, that could be an impact. You evaluate it. Then change in the legal psyche of lawyers. Lawyers who think that the moment it's in legislation, you can't change it anymore. Then change in the legal psyche of even non-lawyers too. And then the question is asked, is social change better if it comes by election or democracy? Is it better if it comes by decree or legislation? Is social change better if it comes by judicial pronouncements? Those are thoughts that you have to address. So thank you very much. For our next class, if there are other questions relating to this, we can have discussions about them as a preview to maybe even the class in jurisprudence or something. So have a nice day.
You too, sir.
Thank you very much, sir.
Sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you, sir.